What I observe unfolding with American military operations against Venezuelan territory represents nothing less than the systematic collapse of hemispheric diplomatic frameworks and the dangerous militarization of what should remain a political and humanitarian crisis. American airstrikes against Venezuelan infrastructure and military targets signal a fundamental shift toward direct military intervention that could destabilize the entire Latin American region while creating unprecedented refugee flows and regional security crises that exceed current international response capabilities. The intelligence is clear, crystal clear. American military planning for Venezuelan operations reflects systematic escalation from economic sanctions and diplomatic pressure toward direct kinetic operations that fundamentally alter regional power dynamics while creating immediate humanitarian consequences. Intelligence assessments indicate that American military strikes target Venezuelan government infrastructure, military installations, and oil production facilities designed to systematically degrade Maduro regime capabilities while avoiding direct regime change operations. What troubles me most profoundly is the systematic abandonment of diplomatic solutions in favor of military operations that could trigger comprehensive regional destabilization without clear strategic objectives or exit strategies. American military intervention in Venezuela operates without comprehensive congressional authorization, regional alliance coordination, or clear post-conflict planning that ensures regional stability and democratic governance restoration. This approach risks systematic regional warfare without adequate preparation for managing consequences. I am analyzing intelligence assessments. Is that detail Venezuelan military capabilities and potential responses to American military operations, including asymmetric warfare capabilities, regional alliance coordination with Cuban and Russian military advisors, and potential for systematic regional escalation. Venezuelan military forces possess sophisticated air defense systems, anti-ship missiles, and guerrilla warfare capabilities that could create sustained conflict scenarios exceeding American military planning assumptions. Congressional oversight of Venezuelan military operations reveals systematic inadequacy of legislative authorization and strategic planning frameworks for addressing complex regional military interventions. American military operations proceed under executive authority without comprehensive congressional debate or authorization that ensures democratic accountability for military decisions with far-reaching regional consequences. This creates systematic constitutional concerns about war powers and democratic oversight of military operations. The humanitarian implication of American military operations in Venezuela include immediate civilian casualties, infrastructure destruction, and massive refugee flows that overwhelm regional response capabilities. Venezuelan civilian populations already face severe humanitarian crises from economic collapse, while military operations compound civilian suffering through infrastructure targeting that affects hospitals, schools, and basic services regional countries lack adequate capabilities for managing additional refugee flows from military conflict. What makes American military intervention particularly problematic is the systematic lack of regional alliance, coordination, and Latin American support for military solutions to Venezuelan crisis. Most Latin American nations oppose military intervention while preferring diplomatic and political solutions that respect Venezuelan sovereignty. American military operations without regional support create systematic diplomatic isolation while potentially triggering anti-American sentiment throughout Latin America that undermines long-term regional relationships. Regional spillover effects of Venezuelan military conflict include systematic destabilization of Colombian, Brazilian, and other border nations that face immediate security threats from military operations and refugee flows. Colombian territory provides optimal staging areas for American military operations while creating systematic risks of Colombian involvement in regional warfare that could expand conflict beyond Venezuelan boundaries. Brazilian and other regional powers face impossible choices between supporting American operations and maintaining regional neutrality. The economic implications of sustained military conflict in Venezuela extend beyond immediate military costs into comprehensive disruption of regional oil supplies, trade, relationships, and economic development that affects global energy markets. Venezuelan oil production already operates at reduced capacity, while military operations could eliminate remaining production capabilities, creating additional pressure on global energy supplies and pricing. Regional economic integration suffers systematic disruption from military conflict and associated instability. Intelligence community assessments regarding Cuban and Russian involvement in Venezuelan defense indicate systematic foreign support for Maduro regime that could escalate American military operations into proxy conflict with great power implications. Cuban military advisors and Russian weapons systems provide Venezuelan forces with capabilities that exceed purely domestic military resistance, while creating potential for direct confrontation between American forces and Cuban or Russian military personnel operating in Venezuelan territory. The legal framework for American military operations in Venezuela operates under questionable international law foundations while lacking clear United Nations authorization or regional organization. Support international law requires clear justification for military intervention, while Venezuelan situation operates primarily as internal political crisis rather than clear international security threat. American military operations without adequate legal foundations create systematic precedent, concern for international law and sovereignty principles. Timeline projections for Venezuelan military operations indicate systematic underestimation of conflict duration and complexity that could create sustained military engagement exceeding current planning assumptions. Venezuelan terrain includes mountainous regions, urban areas, and jungle environments that favor guerrilla warfare and sustained resistance operations. American military advantages in conventional warfare diminish significantly in irregular warfare scenarios that Venezuelan forces could sustain through external support and geographical advantages. Regional alliance implications for American military operations include systematic strain on relationships with Mexico, Brazil, and other major Latin American powers that oppose military solutions. Mexican government explicitly opposes American military intervention, while Brazilian leadership maintains neutrality that could shift toward opposition if military operations create regional destabilization. These diplomatic costs exceed potential benefits from military success while creating long-term challenges for American influence in Latin America. Counter-intervention capabilities that Venezuelan allied forces possess include systematic support from Iranian, Chinese, and other authoritarian nations that view American military operations as optimal opportunity for challenging American regional influence. Iranian military advisors, Chinese economic support, and Russian weapons systems provide Venezuelan resistance with capabilities that could sustain prolonged conflict while creating additional international complications for American military operations. The precedent implications of American military intervention in Venezuela extend beyond immediate regional consequences into systematic demonstration that American foreign policy increasingly relies on military solutions for complex political problems that require diplomatic and development approaches. Successful military intervention in Venezuela encourages future military responses to regional challenges while demonstrating abandonment of diplomatic frameworks that enable peaceful conflict resolution. The coordination for post-conflict Venezuela remains systematically inadequate for addressing reconstruction, governance, restoration, and refugee resettlement. That military operations would require current planning focuses primarily on military objectives while lacking comprehensive frameworks for managing post-conflict scenarios that require sustained international engagement and resource commitment. Democratic governance restoration in post-conflict Venezuela exceeds current international capabilities for nation building and democratic development. Recovery scenarios from sustained military conflict in Venezuela require comprehensive regional reconstruction, refugee resettlement, and democratic governance establishment that exceed reasonable international capabilities while creating long-term commitments that American domestic politics cannot sustain. Venezuelan recovery from military conflict requires decades of sustained international engagement and development assistance that current political frameworks cannot adequately provide or sustain through electoral cycles. As I conclude this analysis, I recognize that American military intervention in Venezuela represents more than regional military operation or humanitarian intervention. It represents like systematic abandonment of diplomatic frameworks and hemispheric cooperation that has maintained Latin American stability for decades while demonstrating dangerous reliance on military solutions for complex political challenges. The decisions made about Venezuelan military operations, regional alliance, coordination, and post-conflict planning will determine whether American influence in Latin America maintains regional stability and democratic development, or whether military intervention creates systematic regional destabilization that undermines American leadership while creating humanitarian disasters that exceed international response capabilities for generations.